Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you ignored every warning sign screaming at you to run? Have you ever convinced yourself that physical pain was just part of someone's quirky way of showing affection? I did. For 2 years of my life, I lived with bruises covering my body, cuts that I bandaged in secret, and injuries that I explained away with elaborate lies to everyone who cared about me. All of this happened because the person causing these wounds smiled while inflicting them and dismissed my pain as nothing more than harmless jokes. My name doesn't really matter for this story, but what happened to me absolutely does. Because if you're sitting there watching this video right now, maybe you're experiencing something similar. Or perhaps you know someone who is and you're trying to understand their situation. What I'm about to share with you fundamentally changed everything about how I understand love, trust, boundaries, and the immense courage it takes to finally stand up and say that enough is enough. This is the complete story of how I systematically photographed every single injury that came from her so-called playful jokes, how she actually laughed directly in my face when I tried to explain that her actions were hurting me, and how that laughter died instantly the moment I walked into my lawyer's office carrying a thick folder filled with hundreds of photographs that would ultimately change both of our lives forever. I never imagined I would become the type of person who needed to document abuse. I never thought that love could feel like walking barefoot across broken glass every single day of your life, never knowing when the next sharp piece would slice into your skin. But here I am today, standing on the other side of that nightmare, and this is my complete truth that I'm sharing with you. When I first encountered Sarah, she represented everything I believed I wanted in a life partner. Our initial meeting happened at a small independent coffee shop in the downtown area on a particularly rainy Tuesday morning, one of those classic romantic meet-cute moments that you typically only see portrayed in Hollywood movies or read about in romance novels. She had accidentally picked up my coffee order from the counter, and when she finally realized her mistake after taking the first sip, she released this bright, genuinely infectious laugh that actually made every single person in the entire shop turn around and smile instinctively. Her energy was absolutely magnetic in a way that's difficult to fully describe. The kind of presence that fills up an entire room and makes you feel more alive just by being in close proximity to it. She apologized profusely and repeatedly, insisting on buying me a replacement coffee immediately. And somehow, through that simple interaction, we ended up talking continuously for 3 full hours, both of us completely missing our respective work meetings, and genuinely not caring one bit about the professional consequences. She was remarkably witty, demonstrably intelligent, deeply passionate about her career as a graphic designer, and she possessed this incredible ability to make me feel like I was the single most interesting and important person in the entire world. We exchanged phone numbers before parting ways, and from that particular day forward, we became practically inseparable. The first few months of our relationship were absolutely intoxicating in their intensity. We went on spontaneous adventures every single weekend, exploring hidden hiking trails deep in the mountains, trying exotic new restaurants that served cuisine from countries neither of us had visited, attending contemporary art galleries and live music concerts featuring local bands. She enthusiastically introduced me to all of her closest friends. I proudly introduced her to all of mine, and literally everyone we knew kept constantly telling us how absolutely perfect we seemed together as a couple. She had this distinctly playful side to her personality that I initially found incredibly endearing and charming. She would poke me repeatedly in the ribs when I was deeply concentrating on something important. She would deliberately mess up my carefully styled hair right after I had spent time getting it exactly how I wanted it. She would hide my car keys in obscure places and then watch me frantically search for them with this mischievous grin spread across her face. It all seemed completely harmless at the time, exactly like the kind of affectionate teasing that couples naturally engage in when they have become comfortable and secure with each other. I laughed along enthusiastically because I genuinely wanted to be perceived as the fun and easygoing boyfriend, the kind of guy who could take a joke gracefully and not be overly serious or uptight about every little thing. My previous romantic relationship had ended painfully because my ex-girlfriend had told me I was far too rigid, excessively structured, and couldn't relax enough to enjoy spontaneous moments. So I made a very conscious and deliberate effort to be significantly more relaxed and go with the flow with Sarah, to not make a huge deal out of small incidents or minor inconveniences. Looking back now with the clarity that only hindsight and therapy can provide, I can see exactly how that specific decision to be more easygoing and accommodating became the dangerous foundation for absolutely everything that came afterward. How my desperate desire to be different from who I had been in previous relationships made me systematically ignore my own healthy boundaries and accept behavior patterns that should never have been remotely acceptable under any circumstances. Sarah started pushing against my boundaries very slowly and gradually, so incrementally that I honestly didn't notice the significant shift happening in our relationship dynamic until I was already deeply trapped in the pattern. The playful pokes that had once seemed innocent became noticeably harder, lasting long enough and with sufficient force to leave small but visible bruises scattered across my arms and along my sides. When I would say ouch or directly ask her to please stop, she would laugh dismissively and tell me I was being far too sensitive, that she had barely even touched me, that I seriously needed to toughen up if I wanted to be in a relationship with a strong woman. The casual hair messing gradually turned into actual pulling, sharp, sudden tugs that made my eyes involuntarily water from the pain. The hiding of my keys evolved systematically into hiding my phone, my wallet, and important work documents that I desperately needed for crucial meetings. And when I would understandably get frustrated or visibly stressed about being late for professional obligations, she would immediately accuse me of not being able to take a simple joke, of being boring and uptight exactly like I had apparently been in my previous failed relationship according to my ex. She possessed this remarkable ability to turn absolutely everything around in conversations, consistently making me feel like I was always the real problem, like my reactions and responses were completely unreasonable, and my expressions of pain were dramatically exaggerated for attention. I genuinely started doubting my own perceptions of reality, seriously wondering if I really was too sensitive compared to normal people. If regular people in normal, healthy relationships routinely dealt with this exact kind of rough playfulness, and I was simply being weak and inadequate. She would frequently compare me unfavorably to her ex-boyfriend, casually mentioning that he never once complained when she played around physically with him, that he was secure enough in his masculinity to easily handle a strong woman who refused to act like a delicate, fragile flower. The underlying implication was painfully clear to me. If I genuinely couldn't handle her particular style of jokes and physical play, maybe I simply wasn't man enough for her. Maybe I was exactly the kind of guy who needed a meek, passive, boring partner who would never challenge me intellectually or keep things exciting and unpredictable. I absolutely didn't want to be that stereotypical guy. I was terrified of losing her and ending up alone again. So I consciously stayed quiet more and more often, forced myself to laugh along when internally I wanted to cry, and repeatedly told myself that real love meant fully accepting all parts of your partner's personality, even the specific parts that caused you significant pain and distress. The first time she left a clearly visible mark on my body that I absolutely couldn't hide from other people, we had been together for approximately 8 months. We were spending the evening at her apartment, cooking an elaborate dinner together as we often did, and I was carefully chopping fresh vegetables while she stood at the stove stirring something aromatic in a large pot. I made what I thought was an innocent comment about potentially adding more garlic to the sauce we were preparing, nothing remotely critical or demanding, just a simple suggestion based purely on my personal taste preference, and she suddenly grabbed my arm with shocking force, her nails digging deeply and painfully into my skin, and said in a cold voice that I needed to immediately stop trying to control absolutely everything she did in her own kitchen, in her own apartment. I was so completely shocked and disoriented by the sudden explosion of aggression that I simply stood there frozen like a statue, unable to move or respond, while she maintained her painful grip on my arm tight enough that I could actually feel her sharp nails systematically breaking through my skin layer by layer. When she finally released her grip and let go, there were 4 distinct crescent-shaped cuts on my forearm, deep enough that they were actively bleeding, small drops of blood running down toward my wrist. I immediately went to her bathroom to clean and assess the wounds properly, and when I looked at my reflection in the mirror above the sink, I saw someone I barely recognized staring back at me, someone with obvious confusion, fear, and profound sadness visible in their eyes. When I finally came back out to the kitchen area, she was calmly setting the dining table as if absolutely nothing unusual or disturbing had just happened, humming cheerfully to herself, appearing completely calm and at peace. I asked her directly why she had done that to me, why she had hurt me like that, and she looked at me with this incredibly innocent expression on her face and said she had just been playing around, that I had been acting bossy and controlling, and she was simply teaching me an important lesson in a fun and memorable way. Fun. That was the specific word she chose to use to describe what had just happened. There was absolutely nothing fun about standing alone in her bathroom watching my own blood run down my arm and drip into the white porcelain sink. But I apologized to her. Can you even believe that? I actually apologized to her for making her feel like I was being controlling and overstepping boundaries, and I genuinely promised to be much more aware and conscious of how I came across in future interactions. She smiled warmly, kissed me gently on the cheek as if rewarding a child for good behavior, and we sat down and ate our dinner together like we were the happiest, most functional couple in the entire world. After that particular disturbing incident, things escalated dramatically in ways I never could have predicted or prepared myself for mentally. The injuries became significantly more frequent, more creatively varied in nature, and more deliberately placed on parts of my body that would be hidden from casual observation. She would pinch the soft, sensitive skin on the inside of my arms with her fingernails, leaving dark purple bruises that took literal weeks to completely fade away. She would deliberately stomp down hard on my feet with her high heels when we were out together in public places, smiling sweetly and charmingly at other people around us while I desperately tried not to limp visibly or show any signs of pain. She would suddenly push me forcefully into walls or pieces of furniture when we were alone together in private spaces, always aiming for places on my body where the resulting bumps, bruises, and minor injuries wouldn't be immediately visible to others who saw me. She actually burned me once with a lit cigarette when I told her I thought we should spend one weekend apart so I could drive home and visit my family who I hadn't seen in months. She just calmly pressed the burning end against my bare shoulder and held it there firmly for a full second while maintaining direct eye contact with me, then laughed and said she was just showing me how much she would miss me while I was gone, that the burn would serve as a physical reminder of her while I was away visiting my parents. I went ahead with that family visit wearing long sleeves despite the oppressive summer heat, and when my concerned mother asked if I was feeling okay or if something was wrong, I lied smoothly and told her I was just exhausted from work stress. The lies became absolute second nature to me, as natural as breathing. I lied constantly to my friends when they noticed a limp or asked about a visible bandage. I lied to my coworkers when they commented on visible bruises that I hadn't managed to cover completely with clothing. I lied to myself most of all, creating elaborate detailed stories in my head about how this was just a temporary rough patch in our relationship, how all couples went through genuinely difficult times, how Sarah loved me deeply in her own unique way, and I just needed to be more understanding and patient with her. I spent hours researching relationships online, reading countless articles about effective communication techniques with your partner, how to properly set boundaries, how to be more emotionally resilient in challenging situations. I genuinely thought if I could just become better somehow, if I could just figure out the exactly right way to approach her and communicate my needs, everything would naturally improve and return to how it had been in the beginning. I never once searched for articles specifically about abuse, because in my mind, abuse was primarily something that happened to women in heterosexual relationships. Definitely not to men, and certainly not in relationships where both people genuinely claimed to love each other deeply. The profound psychological impact of living this way day after day was absolutely devastating in ways that I am honestly still processing and working through even today with professional help. I became extremely hypervigilant about everything, constantly monitoring Sarah's mood and emotional state minute by minute, desperately trying to predict when she might strike next so I could either protect myself physically or avoid triggering her anger through my words or actions. I systematically stopped making any suggestions or expressing any opinions that might potentially contradict hers in even minor ways. I stopped seeing my friends nearly as often as I used to because she would inevitably find something to punish me for after we spent time with them, claiming I had paid far too much attention to someone else or hadn't adequately defended her in some imagined slight that I hadn't even noticed. My work performance started seriously suffering because I was constantly exhausted all the time, physically drained from the accumulated injuries, and emotionally depleted from the relentless stress of never knowing what version of Sarah I would encounter each day when I saw her. Some days she was exactly the wonderful woman I had originally fallen in love with, sweet and genuinely affectionate and full of elaborate grand plans for our future life together. Other days she was cold and deliberately cruel, finding fault with literally everything I did, and using physical pain as her primary means of communication and control. I started experiencing severe panic attacks, waking up abruptly in the middle of the night completely unable to breathe properly, my heart racing uncontrollably, my mind absolutely flooded with vivid, disturbing images of all the times she had hurt me. I lost a significant amount of weight because my appetite completely disappeared, and eating felt like a chore. I stopped engaging in hobbies and activities I had previously loved because I couldn't concentrate on anything except surviving the relationship one day at a time. My family members started asking more pointed questions, expressing genuine concern about noticeable changes they observed in my appearance and behavior, but I had gotten so incredibly good at lying that I could easily reassure them everything was perfectly fine while simultaneously falling apart inside. The intense cognitive dissonance of loving someone who systematically hurt you, of desperately wanting to leave but feeling completely unable to, of knowing something was deeply, profoundly wrong but not having the words or conceptual framework to accurately name it. That dissonance was literally eating me alive from the inside out. Have you ever felt trapped in a situation where you knew something was destroying you but you couldn't find the strength to escape? Comment below if you've experienced anything similar, because knowing we're not alone in these struggles can make all the difference. The specific day I made the conscious decision to start systematically documenting everything was the morning after she threw a heavy glass at my head during an argument about whose turn it was to take out the trash. The glass narrowly missed my head but shattered violently against the wall directly behind me, and a sharp shard of broken glass bounced back and cut my cheek. It wasn't an extremely deep cut, but it was on my face, absolutely impossible to hide from view, and I knew with certainty I would have to explain it to multiple people at work the next day. I was sitting alone in the bathroom at 3 o'clock in the morning, carefully cleaning the cut and applying a bandage, when I caught my reflection in the mirror and genuinely didn't recognize the person staring back at me. My face had become gaunt and hollow. My eyes appeared dead and empty, and there was this defeated slump to my shoulders that spoke of someone who had completely given up fighting. In that moment of brutal, painful clarity, I realized I fundamentally had two choices before me. I could continue down this exact same path and eventually end up either seriously injured or dead, because the clear pattern of escalation was undeniable, and it obviously wasn't going to stop or improve. Or I could start fighting back intelligently, not physically, which would only make things worse, but by systematically documenting what was happening so that when I finally found the courage to leave, I would have concrete proof that this wasn't all in my head, that I wasn't crazy or weak or overly sensitive like she kept insisting I was. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and took the first photograph of the cut on my cheek. Then I slowly took off my shirt and photographed all the bruises covering my arms, my ribs, my back. I photographed the burn scar on my shoulder that had never fully healed properly. I photographed absolutely everything visible. And with each click of the camera, I felt like I was reclaiming a small but significant piece of my personal power, documenting my truth in a way that couldn't be easily denied or reframed or laughed away dismissively. From that specific night forward, I religiously photographed every single injury she caused. I kept all the photos carefully organized in a password-protected folder on my phone, meticulously sorted by date, each one serving as a piece of undeniable evidence that what I was experiencing was real and wrong and absolutely not my fault. Living with someone who systematically hurt me while simultaneously gathering evidence against her created this strange, uncomfortable double life that took an enormous emotional toll. I had to pretend everything was completely normal, that I still loved her deeply, that her jokes didn't bother me at all while carefully documenting each incident and secretly planning my eventual escape. There were numerous moments when I almost deleted all the photographs, when Sarah would have a genuinely good day and be kind to me, and I would think maybe I was overreacting to everything, maybe things weren't really that bad, maybe I should give her another chance to change her behavior. But then another violent incident would inevitably happen, another bruise would bloom across my skin, and I would remember exactly why I started documenting in the first place. I began researching lawyers who specifically specialized in domestic violence cases, reading testimonials carefully, trying to figure out who might actually take me seriously as a male victim. The statistics I found during my research were genuinely sobering and depressing. Male victims of domestic violence are significantly less likely to report abuse or seek professional help due to social stigma, personal shame, and profound fear of not being believed or taken seriously. Many people still operate under the outdated assumption that men simply can't be abused by women because men are supposedly physically stronger, completely ignoring the complex dynamics of psychological manipulation, the crucial element of surprise, and the simple fact that abuse fundamentally isn't about physical strength, but about power and control. I found several online support groups specifically for male survivors of intimate partner violence, and reading their personal stories helped me feel less alone, less like I was some kind of bizarre anomaly or failure as a man. These were men from all walks of life, different backgrounds, different professions, all sharing the common traumatic experience of being hurt by someone who claimed to love them and struggling with whether to stay or go, whether to report or stay silent, whether they somehow deserved what was happening, or if they had the right to expect better treatment. The absolute breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon in early October. We had been together for almost exactly 2 years by that point, and I had been secretly documenting for approximately 4 months. We were supposed to meet some of her friends for lunch at a trendy restaurant downtown, and I was running just a few minutes late because I had stopped to purchase her favorite flowers as a surprise to hopefully improve her mood. When I arrived at her apartment carrying the beautiful bouquet, she was absolutely furious about the 5-minute delay, completely dismissing my explanation and the expensive flowers I had thoughtfully brought. She grabbed the flowers violently from my hands and started hitting me with them, which honestly sounds almost comical when I describe it now. Except she was hitting me hard enough that the thick stems and sharp thorns were actively cutting my arms and face. When the flowers eventually fell apart from the force, she grabbed a heavy ceramic vase from her entryway table and threw it at me with considerable force. I managed to dodge it at the last second, but it hit the wall behind me and shattered into numerous pieces, sending fragments flying in all directions. One particularly large sharp piece hit my leg, causing a deep gash that immediately started bleeding heavily, blood soaking through my jeans almost instantly. I stood there in complete shock, blood running down my leg, surrounded by broken ceramic and destroyed flowers, and something fundamental inside me finally snapped. Not into anger or retaliatory violence, but into absolute clarity. Crystal clear, undeniable clarity that this situation would never get better, that I genuinely deserved better treatment, that staying any longer might literally kill me. I told her firmly I was leaving immediately, and her response was to laugh and tell me I was being overly dramatic as usual, that I was ruining our plans with her friends, that I needed to clean up the mess I had supposedly caused and stop acting like a child. I limped to the bathroom, photographed the deep gash on my leg and the numerous cuts on my arms and face, then bandaged myself as best I could with shaking hands. I walked out of her apartment that day and never went back. The next few weeks were an intense blur of activity as I moved forward determinedly with legal action. I found a lawyer who specialized specifically in domestic violence cases and had extensive experience representing male victims. Her name was Jennifer Martinez, and the very first thing she said to me during our initial consultation was that she believed me completely, that what I had experienced was absolutely abuse regardless of my gender, and that I had every right to seek protection and justice. I showed her the extensive folder of photographs I had been collecting, hundreds of images documenting injuries spanning 4 months. Her expression shifted from professional sympathy to genuine shock as she slowly scrolled through them on my phone. She told me I had done exactly the right thing by documenting everything so thoroughly, that photographic evidence with clear timestamps would be crucial for my case. We discussed all my available options in detail: a restraining order, pressing criminal charges for assault, a civil suit for damages. I decided to pursue all 3 simultaneously because I wanted Sarah to face real, meaningful consequences for her actions, and I wanted to ensure she couldn't do this to someone else in the future. Jennifer helped me write a detailed timeline of our entire relationship, noting every incident I could remember, not just the ones I had photographed. The process of writing it all down was extremely traumatic, forcing me to confront the full scope of what I had endured, but it was also genuinely cathartic, transforming my scattered memories and confusion into a clear, coherent narrative that validated my experience. Jennifer filed for a temporary restraining order first, and we had a court date set for 2 weeks out where I would need to appear and testify about why the order should be made permanent. In the meantime, Sarah had started blowing up my phone with constant messages that ranged from angry to pleading to threatening, all of which I forwarded to Jennifer as additional evidence of harassment and stalking behavior. I decided to confront Sarah one final time before the court date, not alone, but in a public place with Jennifer's knowledge and approval. I wanted her to understand that I was completely serious, that there would be real consequences for her actions, and part of me still hoped that seeing the evidence might make her realize what she had done and seek professional help. We met at a coffee shop, ironically the exact same one where we had first met 2 years earlier, our relationship coming full circle. She showed up looking beautiful and composed, as if we were just 2 former partners having a civilized conversation about why things didn't work out. She started with her usual manipulation tactics, gaslighting me about specific incidents that had happened, claiming I was remembering things incorrectly, suggesting I was having some kind of mental breakdown and needed psychiatric help. I let her talk for several minutes without interrupting. Then I calmly pulled out my tablet and opened the folder of photographs. I turned it toward her without saying a single word. Her face went through a fascinating series of changes as she slowly scrolled through the images. First confusion, as if she couldn't quite process what she was seeing. Then recognition, as she realized these were all injuries she personally had caused. Then anger, as she tried to grab the tablet from me and I pulled it back. And finally, fear, as the serious implications of what I had been documenting began to sink in. She tried to laugh it off at first, saying those photos didn't prove anything concrete, that some of them probably weren't even from her, that I could have gotten those injuries anywhere and was trying to frame her. But her laughter sounded hollow and forced, Nothing like the genuine, infectious laughter I had fallen in love with years ago. I told her calmly that I had already shown these photographs to my lawyer, that I had filed for a restraining order, that I was pressing criminal charges, and that she would be hearing from the court very soon. The fear on her face intensified dramatically, and she started backpedaling frantically, saying she never meant to really hurt me, that she thought I knew she was just playing around, that if I had told her it bothered me that much, she would have stopped immediately. The gaslighting attempt was almost impressive in its audacity, considering the hundreds of times I had explicitly told her it hurt, asked her to stop, tried to set boundaries that she had demolished with ridicule and more violence. Her next tactic was desperate bargaining. She offered to go to therapy immediately, to work on her anger issues, to do literally whatever I wanted if I would just drop the legal action and give her another chance. She cried, something I had rarely seen her do, and begged me not to ruin her entire life over a few mistakes. She talked extensively about her difficult childhood, the trauma she had experienced, the reasons she sometimes lacked control over her actions. For a brief moment, I felt that old familiar pull, that desire to comfort her, to be understanding, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But then I remembered the feeling of blood running down my leg, the panic attacks at 3 a.m, the person I had become under her care, and I knew that her trauma, while real and deserving of compassion, didn't excuse her choices or obligate me to continue being her victim. I told her I hoped she would get help, that I genuinely wanted her to heal and become a better person, but that my role in her life was completely over and the legal process would move forward regardless of her promises. I stood up to leave, and she grabbed my arm, her grip tight, that old familiar pressure that preceded pain. But this time, I didn't freeze. I pulled my arm away firmly, looked her directly in the eyes, and said if she ever touched me again, I would call the police immediately. Something in my tone or my expression must have convinced her I meant it, because she let go and sat back down, looking smaller and more defeated than I had ever seen her. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling lighter than I had in years, despite the difficult road I knew still lay ahead. The court hearing for the permanent restraining order was one of the most difficult days of my entire life. I had to stand in front of a judge and detail the abuse I had experienced, showing the photographs, reading from my timeline of incidents, explaining why I feared for my safety if Sarah was allowed to contact or approach me. My lawyer had prepared me well, but nothing could fully prepare me for the vulnerability of speaking my truth out loud in an official capacity, or for seeing Sarah sitting across the courtroom with her own lawyer, glaring at me as if I was the one who had done something wrong. Her lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, as someone who couldn't handle the end of a relationship and was using the legal system for revenge. He suggested the injuries could have come from anywhere, that I had no proof Sarah had caused them, that my testimony was unreliable because I had stayed in the relationship for so long after the alleged abuse started. My lawyer countered brilliantly, presenting not just the photographs but also medical records from urgent care visits where I had sought treatment for some of the more serious injuries, screenshots of threatening text messages Sarah had sent, and testimony from friends who had noticed changes in my behavior and physical appearance during our relationship. The judge listened carefully to both sides, reviewed all the evidence thoroughly, and then granted the permanent restraining order, stating that the photographic evidence alone was compelling and that my detailed testimony was credible and consistent. Sarah was ordered to stay at least 100 yards away from me, my home, and my workplace, with absolutely no contact of any kind permitted. The look on her face when the judge made that ruling was a mixture of shock and rage, and I felt a powerful wave of relief wash over me knowing that the legal system had validated my experience and provided me with protection. The criminal charges took considerably longer to process through the system, but eventually Sarah was charged with multiple counts of assault and battery. She took a plea deal rather than go to trial, pleading guilty to reduced charges in exchange for probation, mandatory anger management and therapy, and community service. It wasn't the jail time my lawyer had hoped for, but it was something meaningful, an official acknowledgement that she had committed crimes against me and would face consequences. The civil suit resulted in a settlement that covered my medical expenses, therapy costs, and some damages for pain and suffering. More than the money, what mattered was that Sarah had to publicly acknowledge, in legal documents, that she had caused me harm. No more gaslighting. No more claiming I was too sensitive or making things up, just the cold, hard facts recorded in court records that anyone could access. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Sarah moved to another state after everything was finalized, that she had lost several friendships over what happened, that her family was disappointed in her. Part of me felt guilty about the impact on her life, that old programming to take care of her feelings before my own. But I reminded myself that these were consequences of her choices, not my responsibility. The healing process has been long and ongoing. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma and domestic violence, and through our work together, I have begun to understand the complex dynamics that kept me trapped for so long. We have talked about my childhood experiences that made me vulnerable to manipulation, my deep-seated fear of being seen as weak or unmanly if I admitted I was being abused by my female partner, my tendency toward codependency and people-pleasing that made me prioritize Sarah's feelings over my own safety. I have learned that abuse is not always about physical size or strength, that anyone can be a victim regardless of gender, that the most dangerous thing about psychological abuse is how it makes you doubt your own perception of reality. I have learned that love should never hurt, not like that, not ever. Real love respects boundaries, acknowledges pain, seeks to heal rather than harm. I have learned that I deserve to be treated with kindness and respect, that asking for that is not being demanding or difficult, it is simply expecting basic human decency. I have reconnected with friends I had distanced myself from during the relationship, and their support has been invaluable as I have worked to rebuild my sense of self. I have started pursuing hobbies again, rediscovering parts of myself that had gone dormant during those 2 years. I have even started dating again, though slowly and carefully, with much better awareness of red flags and a commitment to honoring my own boundaries. Not every day is easy. I still have moments where I hear something that sounds like Sarah's laugh, and my body tenses up automatically. I still sometimes wake from nightmares about being trapped with no way out. I still occasionally doubt myself, wondering if I overreacted or could have handled things differently. But those moments are becoming less frequent, and when they happen, I have tools to work through them and people who support me unconditionally. Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below and let me know, because one of the most important things I have learned is that we heal through connection and shared stories. If you are currently in a situation where someone who claims to love you is hurting you, please know that it is not your fault, it is not normal, and you deserve help. It does not matter if you are male or female, if the abuse is physical or emotional or both, if you have visible injuries or invisible scars, your experience is valid and there are resources available to help you. Understanding this content, truly understanding that abuse can happen to anyone, and that victims deserve support rather than judgment, that understanding can literally save lives. If this story resonated with you, if it touched your heart, or opened your eyes to something you had not considered before, please leave a like on this video. Your engagement helps stories like mine reach more people who might need to hear them, who might be sitting at home right now wondering if what they are experiencing is normal or if they are being too sensitive. Subscribe to Living Through It for more stories of survival, resilience, and the courage it takes to reclaim your life after trauma. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload, because every story we share here is a testament to human strength and the possibility of healing. I spent 2 years of my life being hurt by someone who called it love, 4 months carefully documenting that hurt, and every day since then, learning how to love myself enough to never accept that treatment again. My photographs served their purpose in court, but more importantly, they served as evidence to myself that my pain was real, that I was not imagining things, that I had the right to seek safety and justice. If you take nothing else from this story, please take this. You have the right to be safe. You have the right to be treated with respect. And if someone in your life is violating those rights, you have the right to document it, to seek help, to leave, and to heal. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for being part of a community that believes survivors and supports each other through the difficult journey from victim to survivor to thriver. Leave your thoughts in the comments, share your own story if you feel comfortable, and remember that every time we speak our truth, we make it a little bit easier for the next person to speak theirs. Take care of yourselves, treat each other with kindness, and I will see you in the next video.